There's a word I want to talk about today, a word that's not quite an official Merriam-Webster kind of word, at least not yet, but it captures so much about modern-day agriculture in one word that it probably should be. It's chickenization.
Chickenization.
This is at the Iowa Farm Table. Today, on our grand finale of our 2025 season, we're going to look at how farming, starting with chickens and now with almost everything, became an industrial endeavor. Chickens, and now hogs and even oats, went from a locally grown product involving numerous people in the community to an industrialized profession, owned and managed by a few. We'll also hear from two farmers in Iowa who are doing things differently, creating models of how to get chicken from smaller farms to your table here in Iowa. I'm Beth Hoffman, journalist, author, and farmer in South Central Iowa, and you're listening to At the Iowa Farm Table, a production of the Iowa Food System Coalition, a group of more than 50 organizations in Iowa working to make the food system more just, equitable, and sustainable.
Back in the late 1920s, chicken was kind of a luxury food. It was kind of like lobster.
Christopher Leonard wrote Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business, a book focused on the growth of the chicken industry.
Even up until the 40s and 50s, when you had a town that produced a lot of chicken, all of these different parts of the business were owned by local business people. You had a local slaughterhouse, you had a local trucking company, you had a local feed mill, you had dozens or hundreds of local farmers raising the birds.
But people wondered if it was possible to mass-produce chickens.
Like as if they were an industrial product. They started experimenting with these big barns that were heated, that were ventilated. They started inventing these automated feeding systems. And a few of these people started to put together these conglomerates. And this model is called vertical integration.
Vertical integration is everywhere today. It's when a company owns the entire supply chain, from growing of the raw materials to the processing to the brand that shows up on your supermarket shelf.
But the real insight of these early industry pioneers like Don Tyson was that if they could own every piece of the business, they could orchestrate it to maximum efficiency. And that's exactly what they did. The Tysons in Arkansas bought a slaughterhouse, they bought a feed mill. They actually bought a lot of chicken farms. They built their own chicken farms, and they built and started to operate their own trucking line. And so over the decades, what they could do is mass produce these animals like as if they were widgets on a factory floor.
Animals as widgets. That was the first part of chickenization. Raising animals as if they were objects in a manufacturing plant. That was, quote, efficiency.
The key is, again, that they own the whole process. All of the wealth produced by this business would stay inside the corporation.
The second innovation of chickenization was growing companies not just vertically, but horizontally as well.
These guys like Don Tyson started to produce these massive corporations. And then they figured out how to get money by going public on Wall Street, borrowed a lot of money. They started making millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. And in the 1990s, these companies started to go on this merger spree and buy each other out.
Before the 1980s, mergers were limited by laws like the Sherman and the Clayton Antitrust Acts. But the Reagan administration interpreted laws to be much more monopoly-friendly. Poultry companies eliminated their competition by buying them out.
And so that dramatically consolidated ownership into a few hands, whereby today, like two chicken companies control half the national market.
Then, the third part of the chickenization process, transfer as much risk as possible away from the company and back onto farmers.
In the early days, companies like Tyson, like I said, they built their own farms, they owned their own farms, but they had this realization that the least profitable part of this chain to own is the farm. First of all, most of the risk is located on the farm, and that's the risk of the animals getting sick and the animals dying. So they came up with this ingenious system whereby they encouraged nominally independent farmers to buy the land, to borrow money to put up these chicken factories, and then raise the animals under contract with the company. And critically here, the companies in this case, they own the animals the entire time. The farmer never even owns the animal. And Beth, I'm not kidding here. There's a clause in the contract that ownership of the bird shifts to the farmer when the bird dies. So they figured that part out too.
Today, a typical farm will have about 8 chicken houses, totaling almost 240,000 square feet of space. It can cost well over $5 million in investment for a farm, excluding the land they also need to own, which makes the farmer completely dependent upon the contracts. You can't very well owe that much money without knowing where your next paycheck will come from. But, Leonard points out, that puts a lot of power into the hands of the companies.
I interviewed this guy named James Blair, who was the general counsel at Tyson Foods, the top attorney, close friends with Don Tyson. And he was actually the architect of many of these contracts. And he said the company realized early on that if you keep farmers under contract and you structure it so that the contracts are maybe for a year or 6 months, and the farmer is forced to pay a mortgage of 30 years, it is the best possible way to keep farmers essentially under your thumb. As they would put it, highly, highly motivated to do the kind of 7-day work week that's necessary to raise birds. What the companies realize is that using this contract system, they could grow much more quickly than if they had to build their own farms. And at the same time, they could induce a group of farmers to come into the system and raise animals for them while still managing to control every aspect of production on that farm.
So why do farmers do it? The median income for a chicken farmer in 2022 was almost $70,000 a year for the 7-day-a-week job. And farms need to upkeep their own buildings too and hire any additional help they might need. And yet, companies report significant waiting lists for farmers to get into the business.
What they're offering to farmers is what these companies present as like a stable living. And the prospect of being able to stay on the land and farm is just tremendously appealing to the people who are born and raised in a rural area, maybe 3rd or 4th generation. But in many of these communities, they've seen the economic opportunity diminish over time. The second group that's really interesting would be immigrant farmers. In Arkansas, for example, Laotian and Hmong immigrant communities started hearing about the opportunity to raise animals under contract, and they started moving to these tiny towns like Waldron, Arkansas, or Berryville, Missouri. And to them, it was that stepping stone into the American dream, and a lot of immigrants have an agricultural tradition of their own.
This is chickenization. 1, industrialize and vertically integrate every part of the process, from growing raw materials to the customer's plate. 2, buy up all the competition. And 3, put the risk back onto farmers, making them less able to bargain for a fair price, better working conditions, or even a non-polluted farm. It's a model that's now spread to many parts of agriculture. The hog industry is chickenized, and cattle is close behind. Tom Harkin was Iowa's U.S. Senator from 1985 to 2015 and was in the House for 10 years before that. He explained to me how the chicken industry sold Congress on the idea that we needed policies to support them.
We made it more and more easier for animal agriculture to become more and more concentrated. These were federal government policies.
Why did we do that?
Because policymakers were convinced by some of the large poultry, mostly poultry people, that this was the most efficient way to do it. Kentucky Fried Chicken was becoming so popular, and fast food was becoming so popular after World War II and then in the 50s. We needed a hell of a lot more chickens. And the efficient way to grow them was the way they had set up the system. And then that led from that to pork production. But efficiency has a lot of different sides to it. Efficient in what way? Did it keep the price of poultry and chickens lower? Yeah, it did. But what has that consumer paid for the loss of their schools, the loss of their communities, the loss of their transportations, the loss of all kinds of things that supported them in their lives?
It's not an exciting product.
That's Jason Grimm.
Like, it's the same chicken, multiplied by billions. And there's not a great flavor. There's not any uniqueness to it.
Jason Grimm raises chickens here in Iowa, but he's not been chickenized. He raises about 2,000 chickens a year, millions of birds less than the smallest industrialized operations, which presents its own problems. Because the system has been bought and merged, smaller scale farms have few places to process birds. Today, there's only 2 facilities in the state of Iowa which are state inspected, which allow farmers like Jason to legally resell chicken to his customers. He used to drive hours to get to one.
We had to have the animals there by 6 o'clock in the morning or 6:30 to unload. So that meant me getting up and leaving by 4 o'clock in the morning. But that also included loading animals, etc. And then you drop them off, but then they're not ready until the afternoon. So just, you're talking just for one trip, that's at 3 hours. If you need to go back the next day, now you're up to 6 hours. So additional cost, time. If you only got 100 chickens, that trip, cost per animal that you have processed is a lot of money.
So Grimm Family Farms built a facility to process their own pasture-raised poultry and to promote that kind of chicken farming in their area.
We saw an opportunity to build a new facility, and to help pay for the operations of that facility is by providing services to other farms. And just, within a 2-hour driving radius of our farm, there is nowhere to go for other farms. So we knew that there's a need.
It was a state grant for butchery innovation awarded through the Choose Iowa program that helped Grimm to do just that. Innovate.
This will be a business that services independent farms. It will provide them the ability to scale or build more capacity in their businesses.
It's a different kind of economic development for rural communities than vertical integration, one in which long-term, slow growth is the focus of investments, unlike trying to recruit a huge manufacturing plant like Tyson or JBS to your town.
It's a quick return in those kinds of investments, but the investments that we're doing is multiple generations, and it is going to impact a much broader part of the community. Like, we're going to impact multiple farms, not just our own.
There are birds everywhere on the planet, but not chickens.
In addition to these 2 models, the big and the small, there's something else going on here in the Midwest, something completely different.
So when we brought chickens into this Midwest environment, our first critical step was to understand what would it look like if we were to up the welfare of the chicken in this specific environment.
Ronaldo Haslet Maraquin is the CEO of Tree Range Farms, a poultry company that recently bought a processing facility in Stacyville, Iowa. They too will process for other neighboring farms. But Maraquin is not interested in how many chickens they can pack into a building or in maximizing the profits for his company. He's interested in the whole picture and wonders what agriculture would look like if we put the animals' needs first.
We sought to restore poultry to its ancestral jungle-like habitat. And so in order to do that, we sought the help from the wiser creatures around here, the hazelnuts, the hawks, the eagles, the big woods trees, and understand from their perspective, how would they welcome the chicken, even though it's an immigrant, and even though it's a species foreign to this ecology.
It's a theory that could not be farther from chickenization, ecologically and financially too. Instead of siphoning out all of the money into corporate bank accounts, Maraquin sees a different business model, one that truly regenerates the land and the communities around it.
then we start regenerating, because then we see everything, all life on the planet, from a very different perspective. And that is when we are able to identify ourselves also as indigenous organisms, indigenous creatures to the earth itself. And when that happens, we can see the other 99% of possibilities that extractive systems simply cannot engage because they are not designed for that.
Tree Range Protocol mandates that farms in their network grow native trees and plants, things like hazelnuts, which farmers can also sell. Chickens spend their days under the trees and shrubs, as their ancestors did in the jungle.
From that perspective, we can now step away and say the integration of the landscape ecosystem, which is all life on the landscape, and the business ecosystem, which is beyond the farm gate, so that we may then close the circles for wealth to flow as opposed to being extracted, from life to thrive as opposed to being manipulated.
The U.S. government has, for a long time, focused on getting customers cheap food, regardless of the public costs. We looked away from mergers, pollution, the way animals were treated, all because our country wants plentiful, inexpensive food in restaurants, grocery stores, even in gas stations. And issues with the meat industry continue. A recent recall of nearly 5 million pounds of chicken in late October was due to potential metal contamination, the scale of which Jason Grimm could never have at his processing facility. And the EPA recently scrapped plans to restrict blood and manure entering water supplies as the Trump administration, quote, defeats the cost of living and unleashes prosperity through deregulation, end quote. But now public opinion has shifted. A majority of Americans have a negative view about big business and would like to see multinationals have less influence in the nation. In other words, we can get off the runaway train if we start making better choices. Senator Tom Harkin.
So I always said it's a false way of looking at efficiency. What if we'd had a program of saying, we think it's more efficient for the state of Iowa to have healthy small towns and communities with hospitals and schools. We think that's more efficient. Agriculture is more than an occupation. It is a way of life. It is an integral part of society, and it's not just an industry that needs to be efficient in very narrow kinds of ways.
It won't be easy for Jason Grimm or Tree Range to survive in a market like Iowa, where chickenized, cheap, plentiful food is the norm. But Marroquin says humans likely don't have a choice.
To the extent that the planet is sick, we are sick. To the extent that we participate in making the planet sicker, we get sicker. And you can go to any database on the world right now, and what you will find is food-related diseases, diabetes, heart disease, all kinds of other problems. And then we have lately started to reckon with mental degeneration of a lot more people, more depression, more suicide, more of this sense of hopelessness that is at epidemic levels in our youth today. All of it is a reflection of how we live. And all of it has a direct correlation to what we put in our bodies and where it comes from. So if anybody has any doubt when they get up in the morning on how their day can be the most optimal and the best for them, go to what you eat. If that food has no nourishment, if that system comes with exploitation of people and abuse of farmers and animals and all of that, it lacks spiritual value, and you will pay the bill for that. Through your body, your mind, and your spirit, we will continue in this path to self-destruction. That's why this is critical. That's why some of us will never stop, will never relent, will never retreat.
Very, very special thanks to Christopher Leonard, Jason Grimm, Ronaldo Haslet Marroquin, and to Senator Tom Harkin. To hear the full interviews with them, you can find links in the show notes. Mallory DeVries and Enrica Deb edited, and Megan Holleran is our intern. This is also our last episode of 2025. Thank you so much for listening to our very first season, and please share your favorite episodes with your friends. We look forward to seeing you again in 2026. I'm Beth Hoffman with the Iowa Food System Coalition. Thanks for listening.